There's a truth about narcissists that hardly anyone recognizes, and once you see it clearly, you'll never interpret their behavior the same way again. Behind the confidence that seems unshakable, behind the charm that looks so effortless, behind that overwhelming air of superiority, there's a quiet kind of suffering that never really lets up. Most people assume narcissists feel good about themselves. They assume these individuals enjoy the damage they cause, that they walk through life satisfied, immune to guilt, immune to emptiness, immune to the fears that trouble everyone else. But the psychological reality underneath is far messier than that. The narcissist isn't actually the untouchable figure they present to the world. In many ways, they're among the most emotionally wounded people you'll ever come across. Their pain hides so well that even the people closest to them usually miss it entirely. Understanding this inner world reveals something most people never get to see, and once you do see it, appearances stop being able to fool you so easily. The first sign of this hidden suffering is almost impossible to spot from the outside, yet it sits at the very center of everything they do, a constant sense of emptiness. From the outside, narcissists usually look brimming with self-confidence. They seem utterly convinced of their own importance, proud, self-assured, completely at peace with who they are. But inside, there's frequently a hollow space where a stable sense of self should be. This isn't emptiness that shows up occasionally after a rough day. It lingers with them almost constantly. They feel it in moments of silence. They feel it when the attention fades. They feel it when nobody's watching, when no one is praising them or mirroring back the image they've built for the world. And because that emptiness feels so intolerable, they spend enormous chunks of their lives trying to plug it from the outside. They chase attention because without it, they start to feel like they don't exist. They chase status because it distracts them, if only temporarily, from what's churning underneath. They demand admiration because the second it stops, they're forced to face the void they've worked so hard to keep buried. This is part of why narcissists so rarely find real peace. Stillness feels wrong to them. Solitude feels like a punishment. Quiet moments expose exactly what their carefully built image was designed to hide. You might notice they constantly generate noise around themselves, filling silence with non-stop talking, replacing uncertainty with grand claims, filling empty stretches of time with new goals, new conflicts, new relationships, new audiences to perform for. What looks like non-stop activity is often really a form of escape. Running from the painful experience of sitting alone with themselves, without the mask, without the performance, without the image they depend on to function. The second sign shows up in something most people completely misread: their constant dissatisfaction with everything they already have. From the outside, it can look like ambition. It can look like someone with impossibly high standards who simply refuses to settle. But underneath, something else is going on entirely. Many narcissists genuinely struggle to hold on to satisfaction for any length of time. The instant they get what they wanted, the thrill fades fast. The relationship that once felt perfect suddenly feels disappointing. The achievement that once felt monumental loses all its shine. The person they once admired starts looking ordinary and flawed. This doesn't happen because life keeps failing them. It happens because their inner world simply can't hold on to fulfillment for very long. Real satisfaction requires a person to feel secure, grounded, emotionally connected to their own sense of self. That foundation is usually missing in a narcissist. So they end up living in a permanent state of wanting more. More attention, more success, more admiration, more proof that they matter. And no matter how much comes their way, it never quite feels like enough. This creates a painful kind of psychological suffering. From the outside, it reads as drive and ambition. From the inside, it feels like an endless hunger that nothing satisfies. They hit their goals and still feel hollow. They enter relationships and still feel hollow. They rack up accomplishments and the hollowness stays right where it was. Rather than looking inward to understand why, they usually point outward and blame the world around them. They convince themselves the next achievement will finally do the trick. The next relationship will finally make them happy. The next admirer will finally fill the gap. It never does, because the problem was never actually external. The wound lives inside, and no outside success can heal a wound the person refuses to even acknowledge. The third sign runs even deeper, and it's something narcissists work hard to hide: the sheer exhaustion of maintaining a false self. Every narcissist builds an image for the world: stronger, smarter, more attractive, more accomplished, more important than they actually feel on the inside. This isn't a role they slip into occasionally. It becomes an entire psychological scaffold, and defending that scaffold takes enormous energy. Imagine living every day like you're on stage, never able to step out of character, constantly carrying the fear that if people ever glimpsed the real you, the whole structure would come crashing down. That's the weight a lot of narcissists carry. They're always monitoring how others perceive them, tracking impressions, replaying conversations, hunting for any sign their image is being questioned. They can't let themselves be fully known, because being fully known means being fully seen, and being fully seen means confronting the very parts of themselves they've spent years running from. That pressure builds into exhaustion. Sometimes it looks like irritability, sometimes it explodes as sudden anger. Other times it shows up as cold withdrawal or an intense grip on control. People often wonder why someone who seems so powerful and self-assured can unravel over a minor criticism. The answer runs deeper than it appears. They're not just protecting their ego, they're protecting the entire structure holding them together emotionally. A narcissist isn't arrogant because they genuinely feel superior. They're arrogant because feeling ordinary is something they cannot tolerate. Their grandiosity isn't healthy self-regard. It's compensation for a sense of self that never fully solidified. This is also why narcissistic injury hits so hard. When someone points out a flaw, questions their image, or withholds admiration, it doesn't register as a small inconvenience. It registers as a direct threat to their existence. For the narcissist, the false self isn't just a mask. It's the only identity they know how to inhabit. Threaten that, and it feels like threatening the foundation of their entire world. That's why their reactions can seem so disproportionate, so explosive or defensive or even cruel over situations that look small to everyone watching. What reads as overreaction is often really an attempt to fend off psychological collapse. The fourth sign lives in a fear they rarely show but carry constantly, the fear of becoming irrelevant. Underneath the confidence, underneath the grand image, underneath the need to appear superior, there's often a powerful dread of being forgotten. They fear being overlooked. They fear being replaced. They fear slipping into ordinariness. For most people, the idea of being average feels merely uncomfortable. For the narcissist, it can feel unbearable because their entire identity hinges on feeling special, chosen, exceptional. The possibility of being unremarkable can feel almost like a psychological death sentence. That's why they struggle so much whenever the spotlight shifts away from them. That's why someone else's praise can register as a threat. That's why they sometimes work to undercut people who outshine them, and why celebrating someone else's success can be genuinely hard for them. For most people, another person's win is just that, another person's win. For a narcissist, it can feel like something being taken directly from them. Every compliment given elsewhere can feel like a compliment stolen from their own account. Every achievement by someone else can feel like a direct challenge to their worth. This tends to intensify with age. Getting older is uncomfortable for most people, but it carries a particular sting for narcissists. Over time, many of the things they've relied on for validation start slipping away. Looks fade, social influence shifts, positions of power become shakier. The attention that used to come so easily starts drifting toward people who are younger, newer, more energetic. The tools they've used to maintain their image get harder to hold on to, and as those sources of validation dwindle, the pain they've spent a lifetime avoiding starts catching up with them. This is part of why some narcissists grow more controlling with age. Some grow more bitter. Some grow more suspicious of everyone around them. Others become unpredictable emotionally. What looks on the surface like arrogance fading or confidence softening is often something far more uneasy underneath. A quiet internal recalibration where the old emotional fuel sources are no longer as available or as effective as they used to be. For someone who has long depended on external validation, admiration, or social reinforcement as a stabilizing force, even subtle shifts in attention can feel disproportionately intense. It is not just about being noticed less, it is about the internal system that once ran on predictable feedback suddenly becoming unstable. In earlier stages of life or influence, there is often a consistent rhythm to how attention is received. Praise arrives more easily, admiration feels more abundant, and social environments tend to reinforce a sense of significance without much effort. Over time, this can quietly become the foundation of identity itself. Not consciously, not deliberately, but gradually, the mind begins to associate being valued with being seen, being validated, being recognized. The internal sense of worth does not fully separate from external response, it becomes entangled with it. But life does not maintain the same patterns indefinitely. Attention shifts, social spaces evolve. Younger individuals enter the same arenas with new energy, new ideas, and often a different kind of relevance that feels more aligned with the present moment. What once felt automatic begins to require effort. What once felt stable begins to fluctuate. And this is where the psychological tension begins to surface. From the outside, it may look like simple aging, changing trends, or normal transitions of influence. But internally, it can feel like something far more personal, almost like a withdrawal of a familiar emotional current. The mind that was accustomed to being mirrored and reinforced begins to notice gaps in that reflection. And those gaps are not neutral. They are interpreted through the lens of identity. If a person has not developed a strong internal foundation, a sense of worth that exists independently of external confirmation, then these gaps do not feel like natural variation. They feel like decline. They feel like loss. They feel like something is slipping away that was once reliably present. And because the mind seeks explanation, it often turns inward in unstable ways or outward in comparative ways. This is where emotional reactions become more complex. Watching younger people rise is not just a neutral observation of generational change, it becomes a mirror. It highlights contrast. It activates comparison loops that were previously dormant. And instead of experiencing pride or appreciation for continuity, the emotional response can shift toward envy or discomfort, not because of malicious intent, but because the internal system is interpreting visibility and relevance as limited resources. At the same time, the reduction in personal influence is not always gradual in perception. Even small changes can feel amplified. A slight decrease in engagement, a subtle shift in social attention, or a change in how others respond can feel like confirmation of a deeper narrative forming in the background. That narrative is often unspoken but emotionally powerful. That relevance is fading, that impact is diminishing, that the center of gravity is moving elsewhere. Panic, in this context, is not always visible as outward chaos. It can be quiet. It can be internal agitation, restlessness, over-analysis, or a heightened sensitivity to social cues that were previously ignored. The mind begins scanning for signs of continued relevance, trying to restore equilibrium through interpretation, adjustment, or control. But because the underlying foundation is external, there is no stable point to return to. Everything depends on response, and response is always changing. This creates a subtle internal paradox. The more unstable the external validation becomes, the more the mind seeks it. And the more it seeks it, the more it notices its absence. This loop can deepen the emotional intensity of ordinary experiences. A neutral interaction can feel like rejection. A delayed response can feel like displacement. A shift in attention can feel like replacement. Yet beneath all of this is something even more fundamental. The absence of an anchored internal identity that does not require constant reinforcement. When that internal structure is not fully developed, the self becomes partially outsourced to the environment. Other people's reactions become a kind of mirror that defines not just how one is seen, but how one feels about existing at all. This is why the experience can feel so destabilizing. It is not simply about pride or ego in a superficial sense. It is about the structure of self-perception itself being challenged by time, change, and social evolution. And when that structure is externalized, even normal life transitions feel like personal erosion. Over time, some individuals begin to adapt. They may reconstruct meaning in new forms, shift identity away from external validation, or find stability in deeper internal values that are not dependent on constant recognition. Others remain caught in the oscillation between seeking admiration and fearing its loss, moving between moments of confidence and moments of quiet insecurity. What makes this dynamic particularly complex is that it is rarely visible in full from the outside. People may appear composed, successful, even confident, while internally navigating a very different emotional landscape. The contrast between external presentation and internal experience becomes part of the tension itself. Ultimately, what is unfolding in these moments is not just about aging or changing influence. It is about the transition from an externally regulated sense of self to the possibility of an internally grounded one. And that transition is rarely smooth. It involves resistance, comparison, discomfort, and the gradual realization that what once felt like stable admiration was never truly stable at all, only conditional and time-bound. In that realization, there is both challenge and possibility. Challenge because the old structure no longer holds. Possibility because it opens the door to something more resilient, something that does not rise and fall with every shift in attention, but instead remains steady even as the external world continues to change. They watch the world move forward without them and experience it as a personal attack. Beneath all of it sits the same fear that's trailed them for years, that if they aren't extraordinary, they're nothing at all. The fifth sign might be the deepest and most heartbreaking of them all: the inability to experience genuine emotional intimacy. Plenty of narcissists have relationships. They might have romantic partners, families, loyal friends, devoted followers. From the outside, it can look like they're surrounded by people. But being surrounded by people isn't the same as being truly connected to them. Real intimacy demands vulnerability. It demands trust. It demands the willingness to expose fears, insecurities, weaknesses, emotional needs. For a narcissist, that can feel nearly impossible. Letting someone else see those hidden layers feels dangerous, exposing, risky, so those parts stay locked away. They might share stories, opinions, even personal experiences on the surface, but the deepest layers of who they are stay hidden behind carefully constructed walls. As a result, they often live in a state of emotional isolation, even while surrounded by people who love and support them. The loneliness doesn't lift. It's the kind of loneliness that attention can't fix, the kind of emptiness admiration can't fill, the kind of hunger that outlasts every relationship they enter. Again and again, they search for connection through channels that were never going to deliver it. They chase control, they chase dependence, they chase admiration and emotional power over other people, but they rarely reach for the one thing that would actually build closeness: genuine emotional openness. Because of that, many of their relationships end up leaving them feeling even more hollow than before. The real tragedy is that what they actually need is something their own defenses won't let them accept. Real love requires being seen. Real love requires being known. Real love requires letting someone witness your fears, your flaws, your emotional needs. For the narcissist, that level of openness can feel unbearable. Instead of feeling like safety, vulnerability registers as danger. Instead of feeling like connection, exposure feels like humiliation. So they stay just outside the closeness they're desperately craving, reaching toward intimacy while simultaneously guarding themselves against it. They confuse admiration with love. They confuse control with connection. They confuse possession with partnership. And when those illusions inevitably crumble, they usually point the finger outward, at partners, friends, family, circumstances, rarely recognizing that the same pattern trails them wherever they go. The source of the problem was never really the people around them. It's the emotional wall they carry inside, a locked door they're too afraid to open. That's the suffering hiding underneath the arrogance. That's the pain tucked beneath the appearance of superiority. None of this excuses harmful behavior. It doesn't erase the damage a narcissist can cause, and it doesn't remove their responsibility for their own actions. But it does offer something valuable. It lets you see them more clearly. It reveals that what looks so powerful on the surface is often deeply fragile underneath. It shatters the illusion that they've got life figured out, that they're somehow winning while everyone else struggles. The truth is usually the opposite. A lot of the people who look strongest from the outside are fighting invisible battles nobody else can see. And once you understand that, their grip on you starts to loosen. The fear they once inspired starts to fade. The emotional hold they had over you weakens because now you're seeing them for what they really are. Not a god, not a monster, not some unstoppable force, but a wounded human being trapped inside a structure they spent years constructing. And when that structure starts to crack, the fallout can be brutal. When the admiration dries up, when rejection finally arrives, when relationships fall apart, when failure becomes impossible to explain away, when the audience walks off and the mask can no longer hold, something painful surfaces. And what's underneath usually isn't strength, it's collapse. It's a depression they don't fully understand. It's rage they can't control. It's shame they can't face. It's grief for the person they might have become but never gave themselves permission to be. That's why narcissistic collapse can be one of the most intense psychological experiences a person can go through. It's not simple disappointment. It's not just failure. It's the unraveling of an identity they've spent a lifetime defending. Everything they leaned on starts to feel unstable. Everything that once defined them starts losing its grip. And suddenly, they're face to face with exactly the feelings they spent years trying to outrun. The deepest irony is that the thing they're running from is often the very thing that could actually heal them. The simple, frightening experience of being an imperfect human being, a person with flaws, a person with fears, a person with emotional needs who doesn't have to be extraordinary to be worthy of love. And yet most narcissists spend their whole lives avoiding exactly that truth. The harder they run from it, the more trapped they become. The The more energy they pour into defending the false self, the further they drift from the real one, and that distance only gets more costly with time. The next time you come across someone whose confidence feels exaggerated, whose sense of superiority feels rehearsed, whose need for admiration seems bottomless, look past the surface. Remember the emptiness they can't fill. Remember the dissatisfaction they can't outrun. Remember the exhausting performance they feel forced to keep up. Remember the fear of irrelevance trailing them. Remember the intimacy they long for but can't let themselves accept. And remember that what looks powerful from the outside might be hiding real vulnerability underneath. Maybe the greatest tragedy of the narcissist isn't only the pain they inflict on others, serious as that is. There's another tragedy that rarely gets noticed. They spend their entire lives chasing an image that was never real, defending a version of themselves that never actually belonged to them, pouring enormous energy into protecting an identity built on fear instead of authenticity. And in doing all of that, they miss the one thing that might have changed everything: the courage to let themselves be seen exactly as they are. Not perfect, just real.